What's happening? This video is going to be a tutorial on how I crafted this 3D printed Bangalore Heirloom. I was really excited for this project. Not only am I a huge Apex fan, but I'm pretty eager to surprise my brother with this present. Anyways, let's get into the video on how I made this. Starting from the top, I use a 120 sanding group paper to sand all the areas that have leftover support. I do this with all my prints till I see and feel that they're pretty smooth. Moving on to the next step, I use Gorilla Epoxy to bond the blade and handle together. This epoxy is pretty strong and will always be one of my go-tos when I want to put pieces together. When the epoxy is done drying after an hour or two, I apply a coat of bondo glazing putty. This is going to be a key factor in making the print smooth and hide the lines that the printer made. This is the first of many different techniques when smoothing out the surface of the print. I suggest wearing a ventilator mask and gloves when doing this. It's a very big no-no for the lungs. After a couple hours of letting the putty dry, it'll be ready for sanding. I use a 120 grit and go over all the prints. You don't really want to sand too hard, just enough to get the first smooth layer. The second step for sanding is applying a spray of filler primer to the prints. I hammered nails and plywood and then placed the blade and sheath on top to dry quick. When the filler primer finished drying, I started sanding, this time with a 220 grit for each piece. Again, all around until it becomes smooth. As I was going around the print, I had realized I didn't get the bondo that was in between the vents on the sheet. So, using a flathead, I started chipping away. Before I started the last part of sanding, I used a wet napkin and tried to get as much of the primer dust that was left on the print. This technique is called wet sanding. With the 1000 grit, I started going over each piece thoroughly. After all that sanding, I prepared each piece for a paint job. On this print, I decided to use a white spray paint for the base. When fully dried, I used masking tape to cover up areas I didn't want to be painted silver. Rust-Oleum metallic dark silver is what I spray painted for the blade. All the spray paints I use will be in the description below. I messed up by not sealing the edges 100%, so I ended up just masking it again and starting the process all over. I used Rust-Oleum mirror effect on the handle part where the metal is shown. Setting the blade aside, I began covering up the areas of the sheath to get another color of spray paint in. To achieve this color, I used sun yellow spray paint and went all over the sheath. After a couple hours of letting the yellow paint dry, I started masking again. I wanted to make the 3 black stripes that were in front. Rust-Oleum Canyon Black was the paint for this job. Back to the blade. I took off the tape covering the handle, then masked the silver and white parts to apply the black. Then I set the blade aside to dry. Jumping back to the sheath, I started using a new technique. I wanted to get the paint chipping off effect, so I used some acetone to reveal a bit of the yellow underneath. Before I finished with a clear coat, I jumped back to the blade. I wanted to check the handle to make sure no black smudges went onto the other parts. Since we're not actually in the Apex universe, I wasn't going to be able to achieve the glowing part of the blade. So I decided to mask it up, spray paint it, then use some acrylic paints. Placing the blade aside to dry, I started a clear coat on the sheath. To get a bit of a shine, I used clear gloss. Now, time for the wunderbar part, which is revealing those nice crisp lines underneath. Going forward, I focused on the much more finer details of the blade. For the pointy end, I used a golden paint. And on the handle, a lighter shade of yellow. Once all dried, I started the clear coat. The blade and the white parts of the handle were coated in gloss. In game, the handle doesn't really shine, so I use a matte finish. As everything was drying up, I came to a realization I wasn't working on the bottle caps, so I started right away. I spray painted 2 caps golden and the other silver. I placed some masking tape on the golden caps, and using an X-Acto knife, I cut out as close as I could to the eye that's on the caps. I had gone to Michael's to get the leather string that goes around the sheath holding the caps. Doing some double checks, I used this reference picture and I knew I had to get the paracord braid on the string. I didn't have a marker on me, so I used acrylic paint to mark the length I was gonna do the braid. I had that same braid on my keychain that I made a long time ago, and I thought using that would mean a lot more. So, after taking it apart, I placed it on the string. When sealing the braid, please be careful not to burn yourself. When wrapping the sheath with the string, make sure to pull tight each go around so it doesn't come loose. I tied a knot at the end, then proceeded to put the caps through. And there you have it, the tutorial no one asked for on how I made this heirloom. I really like the way this one came out. At the end, the sheath was a little bit tight, but the person that made the model hit me up with an updated STL file. Anyways, I hope you have a good morning, evening, night, wherever you're watching from. Peace.